Hello, Blerjana. It is my pleasure to have this conversation with you. We're recording this interview as part of interviews within Media Freedom Rapid Response Project, a project funded by the European Union. I'll shortly introduce you, and then we'll start with the questions. We'll try to keep this between 10 to 15 minutes. Dr. Blerjana Bino is the co-founder and the executive director of the Center for Science and Innovation for Development, an NGO in Albania working on democratic development, good governance, media and communication. She's also the lead researcher for Albania at the Safe Journalist Network in the Western Balkans. She has a PhD in communication sciences and a Master of Science from LSE. Blerjana does fantastic work on media freedom in Albania. She documents threats against journalists and media workers at the national and international level, advocates for improvement of policy and legislative frameworks on media freedom, and organizes support for individual journalists. Personally, I've been working with Blerjana very, very closely, and I'm very glad to have this conversation together. But at the same time, I remain very worried about her safety because she operates in a country which is a little bit, I would say, hostile to journalists, activists, and civil society. And I'd like to start this interview precisely with the issue of safety. Is Albania a safe environment for public watchdogs?
Thank you very much, Flutura, for the opportunity for this interview, but also many thanks for the support and the work that you have done for all of us in Albania and for media freedom. Much appreciated. Even though we have the constitutional guarantees in place for protecting the rights and freedoms of journalists, media workers, activists, civil society organizations, and public watchdogs, unfortunately, the reality is different, and these constitutional guarantees are not basically implemented in practice. We have yet to become a truly safe environment for those that with courage try to hold those in power accountable or try to do professional journalism that is in the interest of the public. What we see is that these individuals or organizations face intimidations, face pressure, sometimes subtle, sometimes very explicit, and threats. Last month, just the past 2 months, we saw several attacks against independent media outlets, such as Citizens, for example, that do critical reporting. They received a digital army of attacks against their social media presence and their website. The same happened to 2 political movements, anti-establishment and oppositional political movements, and some other independent content producers. We also saw in the past months, again, a resurge of the anti-media narrative from the Prime Minister, referring to oppositional media as pipe sewers, but also from the mayor of Tirana as well. We've seen coordinated vicious smear campaigns against one of the best independent and investigative journalists that we have, such as Blerjana, coordinated attacks both from the position and the opposition against Birn in Albania, and life-threatening messages against activists, Isam Zyrai, also a journalist, and even inappropriate behavior of the Prime Minister towards Ambrosia Meta, which is a journalist from an oppositional TV station in Albania. So as you can see, just from these examples from the past few months, it's obvious that journalists are faced with intimidations and pressures. And in addition to this, we have seen from the data from 2023 an increase in the lawsuits against journalists that try to basically stifle their public participation or discourage them from reporting. Also within the newsroom, journalists report pressures from their owners, and sometimes they find themselves more often than not in the dilemma: do they follow their standards of reporting, or do they have to adhere by the editorial line, which is basically an instrument of the owners to pursue their interests? And then the last point I'd like to make is the social and economic insecurity because of the working conditions. And this leaves journalists, particularly those that want to hold those in power accountable, very vulnerable and exposed to pressure. So this is the current situation, and of course it's actually a picture that shows that much more needs to be done to protect those that fight for freedom of expression, media freedom, and journalists that do good quality journalism in Albania.
Thank you very much, Blerjana. I think you answered partly to a follow-up question, which is connected to the recent reports that were issued starting from end of last year. We had the EU State Department, Reports Without Borders, publishing reports one after another, and all of them either note lack of progress or deterioration of media freedom, depending who published the reports. Do you agree with such findings of these international reports?
Yes, I generally agree with the findings. I believe that they basically confirm the systematic issues regarding media freedom that we have been monitored and that we have raised alerts about in the past few years, and they also reflect the concerns, the genuine concerns, I would say, of journalists on the ground. And to the list of the reports that you mentioned, I can also add the Freedom House Nations in Transit report. Yeah. They did a very good overview of the challenges of media freedom in Albania, but also the Transparency International National Integrity System report published last month also painted the same picture. But I want to highlight that these reports and the findings of these reports are not occurring in vacuum. So they also, I think we need to understand them also in this broader political landscape in Albania that is characterized at the moment by very high level of political polarization. And in the past 11 years, year on and on, we have seen a concentration of power, an increased concentration of power in the hands of the executive and primarily in the hands of the prime minister, a very weak opposition that is not able to perform its function for the check and balances, and also a shrinking space for civil society. It's not simply about bureaucratic hurdles, financial changes in the law that affect civil society. It's not simply about funding, but it's also about the struggle that civil society actors face in making their voices heard in the public discourse or in the decision-making processes. So the findings of these reports about media freedom, freedom of expression, safety of journalists also need to be seen in this broader context of democratic processes or lack of democratic development and implementation of the rule of law in Albania. And basically, as I said, it is another reminder of the need for intervention, and it's also they are also a good instrument for us that work in the ground to use them as an instrument to exercise some kind of pressure towards the institutions.
I'll follow up with two questions and merge them in one. Now, it's a difficult question to ask you to highlight three top concerns that you have, and some of them you already mentioned, and I don't want to simplify this over complex situation, but maybe for our viewers. So what would be the three top concerns that are present with regard to media freedom in Albania, and what is the way forward? I guess reforms are needed in order to improve the situation, but how would this look in practice? And again, I understand it's a complex question, if we can simplify it for our viewers.
Yeah, I think, as you said, I mentioned slightly, but I think the first and the key concern is this structural, systemic issues that we have of the media ecosystem, characterized by this complex web of powerful economic and political vested interests that work in tandem, in some cases also with the organized crime. And then this is also reflected in the high level of media ownership concentration and very limited lack of proactive transparency regarding media ownership, but also regarding funding and support that they receive indirectly from the government. So this structure, this systemic issue has created an environment that is not helping independent quality journalism, professional journalism, or those that want to do journalism in the public interest, and has led to this situation of intimidation, pressure, threats, and also a lot of self-censorship on the side of journalists. The second component is the concentration of public information and lack of access to public information, or very limited, restricted, I would say, because of a culture of lack of transparency and lack of accountability, because of that concentration in the hands of the executive, and because of weak rule of law and check and balances systems in place. What we see currently in the information ecosystem is a very strong propaganda on the side of the government, and unfortunately we have mapped coordinated disinformation campaigns on the side of the opposition or other political actors. And this does not help, citizens receiving impartial and free and checked information. I believe that we have, from the political actors, primarily from the government, the Socialist Party, but also from the other political actors, a strategic effort to make professional journalism completely not necessary, to marginalize it, and it is being substituted with propaganda, with ready-made audiovisual materials, and with very limited space for journalists to interact directly with decision makers, with politicians, with ministers, head of agencies, and so on and so forth, and to hold them accountable. And then the last issue is looking towards the media community itself. I think that the mechanisms for self-regulation are very limited, and the self-organization, so the collective action on the side of journalists is missing, also because of all this contextual and this structural and political issues that we mentioned. But this lack of collective action and the very limited self-regulation mechanisms also exacerbates the vulnerabilities and exposes journalists even further to pressures. Now, about the way forward, as European integration is the only game in town for democratic development in Albania, and unfortunately one of the major and the only incentives so far making decision makers and politicians working towards some reform, again, the EU session is providing at the moment a strong impetus or a driving force for reforming the media freedom landscape. The screening report clearly highlighted the necessity for reform, particularly regarding safety of journalists, freedom of expression, and media freedom. So we as civil society organization and media organization and are trying to leverage this momentum to pressure governments towards reform. What we see is that there is this approach of just fulfilling the benchmarks and ticking the boxes on the side of the government. For example, approving roadmaps that include measures for media freedom and safety of journalists, but there is a clear lack of political will and institutional commitment to make these things happen in reality. We see, for example, some declarations that they are open for a structural dialogue with civil society and media community, but in practice there is no action in this regard. And even when changes are approved, the consultation process again is with flaws, is not that inclusive and that transparent as it should be, particularly for major reforms such as those that are planned as part of the EU accession process. So the inclusivity and the transparency and accountability of the consultation process for legal and regulatory changes regarding any aspects of media freedom and safety of journalists in Albania is crucial, and is the first step. And then the second is this start of the structural dialogue. But for that as well, we need this kind of guarantees that it will be inclusive, transparent, and accountable. We have also some specific.
Blerjana, we have only a few seconds left, I think. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to ask you, and maybe you conclude with these remarks. So as ECPMF and MFR, we've been twice in Council of Europe Platform on Safety of Journalists. We've been twice in the country. We're very interested and remain interested in Albania. We want to continue to work together. How can press, media freedom, international organizations help Albania towards the reform? And I would like to ask you also to conclude with these remarks.
Yes. Your commitment and dedication is very valuable for media freedom in Albania. I think the fact-finding missions are a very good instrument, not only to shed international light to our challenges, but also to pressure the institutions. So considering the developments in Albania, I think another fact-finding mission in late 2024 or 2025 is needed. Monitoring the cases, reporting and alerting about the cases of violations is another instrument you use, and I think it's very good also in combination with local networks such as the Safe Journalist Network, and this needs to be continued and strengthened. And also the advocacy efforts. There is so much that we can also learn from international organizations in terms of advocacy, and we can make more pressure and achieve change if we join forces in our advocacy with the international organization. Also, the legal support that you provide or any other kind of support for journalists who are sued or who are attacked, because in Albania there is no free legal aid for journalists and protection mechanisms are very weak. So this support is much appreciated. Another component, of course, is working towards capacity development, exchange of experiences. But overall, I think this international solidarity and support is important, not only in terms of advocacy, but sometimes is important also in terms of giving us a sense that we are not alone in this, and that there are other organizations or individual experts that support us and that are willing to support and work with us to improve media freedom in Albania.
Thank you very much, Blerjana. We as ECPMF and MFRR will continue to work with you very closely. And again, thank you for your amazing work that you do in Albania. And we conclude here this interview. It was a pleasure. All the best.